Good morning. So, hey, I want to talk about a topic today that came up in a group that I'm in, which is for Christian parents, primarily Christian homeschooling parents. And just off the bat, any of the stuff that I'm sharing from that particular conversation, those individuals gave me explicit permission to share. But beyond that, it just got me started thinking. And so I want to talk this morning about another aspect of spiritual abuse, and that has to do with spiritual abuse in the ways that we parent. So I'm going to take a moment here and just share this video on my Facebook page and stuff because, because I need to do that. And if you are watching already, I would love it if you would go ahead and just share too, and that helps me out. So my what I want to share, not just share, I want to talk. Let's talk. I want you to give me your thoughts, and I'm going to be watching here on my laptop while I talk about this. So in this conversation that got my juices flowing this morning, there was a question about whether or not it is appropriate to, or even necessary, to choose what and how and what kinds of education we encourage our children to have, because of whether or not we should encourage our kids to get more advanced higher education. Or should we encourage our children to do like short-term training kind of things because they need to be out there in the world doing like gospel work? Different denominations, different stripes of conservative, evangelical Protestantism have different ways of approaching this and different things of calling it. So some of them are like doing missionary work or doing Bible worker kind of things or doing evangelism work. And I realize that not all Christian denominations actually say things or teach things about let me rephrase that. Not all Christian denominations place a really strong emphasis on like, hey, Jesus is coming soon. You need to stay out of the world out there. So I realize this is not relevant to everybody everywhere. But what I want is to talk to those of us who have experienced some of this and to those who where it is relevant. So I'm just sharing this in another group here. So hey, take a moment, share it too if you are there. So in that that mindset. So urging kids to do short gospel-based education or often stay home. Here's another thing. There are some organizations, some denominational divisions that really encourage like all their daughters to stay home until they get married. And then they just move from daddy's home to husband's home and they never got an education. So I want to kind of address that too. But really, it's just this whole question of how much do we balance out the dilemma between helping our kids realize that gospel work is a hugely important thing in our world versus go to college, get a degree, build a career. So first, I want to talk about and address some of the idea that they just where this is most common and why it's problematic. So it's most common among conservative, more fundamental kind of religious groups that have a strong bent toward control, coercion, and honestly, if I'm just really brutally honest, conspiracy theories. Why is it problematic? Well, a big part of that is because it's a fear-based way of approaching the world. And 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For I have not given you a spirit of fear, but of love and power and a sound mind." So I'm saying, hey, why don't we talk about this with a sound mind and without fear and with a spirit of love and God's power. So another thought is why this whole idea is problematic is just spinning off of that fear-based. When we're telling our kids that they need to avoid higher education because Jesus is coming soon, we're also basically telling them, be good because Jesus is coming back really soon, and that's your only reason to be good. And that's feeding the wrong message. Instead of developing character because that gives you the most fulfilling life, because that is what Jesus has called us to do, because that strong character and wise choices are how we succeed in sharing the beautiful joy of the gospel that Jesus has given us with a world that lives in depression and discouragement and sometimes a sense of great emptiness and loss. When we feed our kids this fear-based message, we are doing them a disservice. We're driving our children away from loving Jesus. And along the same lines, the whole don't go to college, don't go get a job out in the world because you're going to get contaminated by the big bad world out there. That's also inconsistent with how Jesus not only lived his life, but how he taught others to live and act and serve. And beyond that, this whole idea is problematic because, not least because it keeps our best and our brightest young people out of society's workforce, where they could be making a profound difference by living the gospel out daily to people who may never meet or interact with a representative of Jesus Christ and understand the love and the life-changing, transforming power of the gospel in any other way. Also, it's isolationist. It's exactly the opposite of Matthew 28 and the Great Commission to go out into all the world. And it perpetuates, we're going to talk about this a little bit more with a story, but it perpetuates unbiblical tendencies to act and to allow forms of abuse, control, and coercion that were never intended or modeled by Jesus. So when we're talking about all of this, one of the things that this is someone in the original conversation that got my juices kind of flowing on this. She says, look, hey, I've seen different approaches to raising kids. So this is my friend Bella. And she's like, some people live like the world's going to end like next year or this year. And they live with this huge level of fear and fervor and zeal. But here's the issue. They limit their kids' education to like missionary status only, and they only let them learn these narrowly specific types of skills, and those things don't bring career status. They don't bring financial stability. They don't bring a sense of success or achievement in the world that we do live in. And so they simply cannot fathom, these kinds of parents simply cannot fathom that their child, I'm tripping over my own words here, they can't fathom that their child could become an attorney, a doctor, an engineer, a professor, anything, because they see higher education as a waste. And that's at best. And at worst, as a total threat to spiritual closeness with Jesus Christ. Now, caveat. Is it possible for higher education to derail our children's connection to Jesus? Absolutely. Flip side, is it possible for us to teach our children every single aspect about Jesus and the gospel and for them to still choose to walk away? Also, yes. So, do we avoid teaching our children things that are important for their future success in the world in which we live simply because there's a risk? No. Come on. No, what we do is we teach them how to process information and think critically instead of training them up to live accepting exorbitant amounts of control. You see, if we live as parents with exorbitant amounts of control and the authoritarianism and dominance and power over our children in unhealthy ways while they are in our homes, then when they grow up and they leave, they don't know how to operate in any other kind of environment, because we haven't trained them to think for themselves, to have critical analysis, and to measure other messages against what they know to be true. And then it's on us. Yes, our children grow up to be young adults and then mature adults with their own free will, but it is our duty while they are young as parents to teach them critical thinking skills and how to process information in the world so that they are not left without a rudder, wandering through everything else where other people can take control over them as well and lead them astray because nobody ever taught them how to think for themselves. Now, is that the easier way to do things as a parent? Yeah, no. I have 2 young people in my house that I am trying very hard to teach to think critically, and you know what that means? That means we talk. It means we talk all the time. It means there is no off time for learning and discussion and analysis, because they're full of questions. They're full of questions all the time, and it's exhausting. But you know what? That's okay, because that's my job as a mom, to teach them to observe and to think and to process and to critically analyze and to hold those things up against the things they see, up against Scripture, the gospel of Jesus Christ, good character, high principles, and measure everything they see around them against what they know to be true, and then sort through it. The younger we start teaching our kids these things, the more they own their beliefs for themselves. So my friend Bella says, look, there's all these people who are like totally isolationist with their kids, and they're like, whoa, no college for you, no higher education for you, you're gonna get contaminated. And then there's the flip side of that, and there are other types of parents who make grades and college everything. Absolutely everything is about academic superiority and success. And so in their zeal to push their kids forward, they miss the education of teaching their kids how to connect in a practical way with God. They throw out like general religious quotes like, pray to God for help, God will be with you, but their lives don't reveal genuine substance that their children can learn to depend on. So these kids, these types of children and these types of families become religious only in name, because they've learned to use religion and nice words to help prop up their social status, to move up the educational career ladder in a religious context. And then there's the middle of the roaders. There's the people, this is still my friend Bella's talking, and there's the middle of the roaders whose children graduate from all walks of high school, whether that's public school, private school, church school, homeschool, and then they go off to college and they walk away from everything that is spiritually connected to anything, and they embrace all the frivolous, evil junk that this world has to offer. That happens too. But her point was, and this is what I loved, her point was that the real goal and aim of education for us as parents is to teach our children how to have a real, authentic, living, practical, daily, transferable, transformational relationship with Jesus Christ. If we model that, and if we teach our children how to cultivate that, then they are able to pray for guidance alongside us. They're able to ask God to show them next steps in their educational choices. They're able to really hear God's voice, and if they make wrong choices, they make missteps, they can correct when they realize they haven't made a wise choice, because they know that they have value and they are not rejected and diminished in their value simply because they made a wrong choice. That path looks different for every single child. There's not like one okay path that works for everyone, because we know as adults When we think this way, we know that God has a different purpose and a different journey for every single kid. The crucial thing is not following a specific path. It is knowing how to hear God's voice and respond to his will. And the rest will fall into place. The other crucial thing that I want to add to my friend Bella's words is that it isn't just about that connection with God. It is also about learning how to think critically and to act in every context, wherever we are, with empathy and compassion and awareness for living out Jesus and his love and his healing and his accountability in every life context. So I remember when my firstborn when I was pregnant, and when he was like a baby in arms. So my firstborn, I was having a firstborn son, and part of our family at the time was from a different culture than mainstream American Caucasian culture. And in that culture, it was very, very common for parents to dictate what their children were going to have as careers. And I remember people asking me, before my child was even born, what is he going to be when he grows up? What have you chosen for him? And honestly, I looked at them like they had lost their ever-loving minds, because my response was, I don't know. And I don't care what he becomes when he grows up. And then they looked at me like I had three heads. Like, is he going to be a doctor? Is he going to be a preacher? Is he going to be an attorney? This particular cultural, immigrant culture had a very strong emphasis on prestigious public success for their children. And I said, I don't care. I don't care if he's a plumber. It doesn't matter to me. You know what does matter to me? That he lives with a missionary heart. That he lives with the heart of Jesus, of kindness and support and love and care to other people, no matter what brings him happiness as a career, no matter what he is good at. I don't care, and I don't think it's ever a parent's right or position in any way to dictate what our children choose to do as far as a career or a role path in their lives, sons or daughters, because that is between them and God. We are not the ones who bestowed them with their gifts, their skills, their talents, their interests. God did. And if we get in the way of what God has designed for them to do because we want something that makes us look good as parents, we are completely out of line. I have seen so many young adults grow up and go to college and waste. Now, I'm a huge proponent of higher education, but I've seen so many kids go to college and waste tens of thousands of dollars in tuition and college living expenses on a degree that they have no interest in, no desire to do, and honestly, no aptitude for. Do you know why? Because mommy or daddy or the grandparents or the aunts and the uncles conspired to tell them this is what they need to do in order to be okay and accepted part of the family and reflect well on the family. That is so wrong. That is a form of abusive control, coercive control in its own right. It's not the main topic of this video, but it is also a form of coercive control. Your job as a parent is to empower your child to follow the path that God has outlined for them according to the gifts and skills and talents and abilities and interests that God gifted to your child as a unique individual, to maximize those things with a compassionate, empathic heart and a life that is sold out to serving Jesus Christ in any career. So, in all of this, I'm transitioning a little bit here. In all of this, one of the things that I hear, it's not the only reason for people really controlling their kids' educational futures, but one of the reasons that I hear is like, well, Jesus is coming back soon, so you don't need to go to college. And yet I heard that a lot 20, 25 years ago when I was a teenager and growing up into my college years. And here's what that does. So let's talk about that for a second. A lot of us in my age range, like 40 somethings, we all, if you grew up with parents who were in the church or in a conservative religious kind of background, you may have heard some of this. So drop me a comment and tell me what you think if you heard any of this. So a lot of the older generation and their contemporaries, 60s, 70s, and 80s, they were 100% certain, those who used that Jesus is coming back as a mentality for this, they were 100% certain that they would never get old enough to have kids. And then they got old enough to get married and they had kids. And then they were 100% certain that their kids would never reach school age. And then their kids were old enough for school. And then they were 100% certain kids would never reach teenage years because Jesus is going to come back before then. And so they never planned for retirement. They never planned for old age. They never actually bought property or did wise financial management. They never provided for their children's educational costs in the future. And you know what? A whole lot of that, I'm not being super judgmental. I'm just stating facts. A whole lot of that was people who were very, very passionately dedicated and sold out to doing whatever it was that they felt God was calling them to do. And I have high respect for that level of commitment and dedication. So I'm not saying this to insult anyone who spent those decades living that way. But here's the thing. Those people all now have grandchildren. Some of them have great-grandchildren, and we're all still here. Does that mean I don't believe Jesus is coming again soon? No, I absolutely do. Does that mean I don't believe that we should use Jesus coming again soon as a reason not to live practically in a daily way that is common sense in the world? Yes. I think that is something we should do. So here, though, this is where some of you are going to think I have lost my marbles. I haven't, I promise. I don't believe it matters when Jesus comes again. Yeah, I know. That sounds like an inflammatory statement. Yes, I believe Jesus is coming again soon. No, I have not apostatized and forgotten all of the Bible studies about the second coming. But don't get me wrong. I believe Jesus is coming again soon. Here's what I mean, though. I believe that using Jesus coming again as a motivator for decision making, financial planning, educational planning, career planning, marital planning, family planning, that's ridiculous. Now, yes, we've had generations who have chosen to do that. If that's what you did in the past, and now we are still here, and you're continuing to live forward, I'm not standing in judgment of your commitment and dedication to that in the past. I'm talking to the people who have the opportunity not to repeat that cycle right now. We can't change the past. But if you are right now using the idea that Jesus is coming soon, so my kids shouldn't go to college, or if you are a young person who's saying, Jesus is coming soon, so you know what, I am going to not go and get an education that will allow me to provide well for myself. See, here's the flaw in that. Jesus is coming is instantaneous if you're in a car wreck today. So we could say, well, there's no point in ever getting an education for anything because we could just like die right now. And then what happens when you live to 85 and you're still hoping someone else is generous enough to take care of your bills? That is not what the Bible is talking about. I believe that it doesn't matter when Jesus is coming back from the perspective that it isn't about when he's coming back in the clouds so much as it is about living daily in a way that we want to be ready to meet him regardless of how we're introduced. So here's some scripture for that before you all think I'm crazy and apostatized. Apostatized. Yeah, I totally just mispronounced that. Joshua 24:15 says, choose you this day whom you will serve. Now tell me, Joshua 24, that was thousands of years before the first coming of Jesus Christ. Was that because Jesus was coming soon? Nope. Do you know why it's important? Do you know why it's important to choose Jesus right now? Because the choices that we make today shape our character for the future, for tomorrow, for 5 years from now, for 10 years from now. My choices today create the grooves in my brain, the neural pathways that define my identity, that build my habits, or strengthen the chains that bind me. My choices today dictate whether or not a year from now or 5 years from now, I'll even be able to recognize a moral dilemma if I see one. My choices today dictate whether or not I will continue to live in harmony with my conscience as life goes forward. That is why we have an incredible obligation to choose you today. Choose you this day whom you will serve. Because it is all about living in harmony with Jesus in a way that cultivates our daily surrender and daily character growth. So, one of my favorite authors, loosely quoted, says we should live like Jesus is coming today and plan as though he may not return until we're old age or dead. So what does that mean to me? That means we focus on the strength of character for today, but we also choose to be wise and plan and prepare and follow the biblical mandate to leave an inheritance for our children. Proverbs 13:22. I actually have that open right here. Proverbs 13:22 says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. The point is that we are supposed to live wisely and not just provide, just take care of today. Now, are we supposed to worry about the future? No. Jesus was very clear. Do not worry about the future because God will provide for you what you need today. The lilies don't worry, the sparrows don't worry, all of those kind of things. But worrying and planning and providing responsibly are not to be conflated here. Those are not the same things. Now here's another great verse about this, and that is Luke 19:13. This is the parable where the rich man calls his servants and gives them money, and he says, make use of it until I come back. Another translation says, occupy until I come. Another one says, do business with this until I return. Another one says, engage in business until I come back. The point was that we are not to avoid healthy, normal interaction. We are to embrace it. And while we embrace it, instead of living in an isolationist tendency, we are to teach our children, by example, how to live in the world, not consumed by the world, but to live in the world successfully, successfully representing the power of Jesus Christ, no matter what kind of job we have. So I think my friend Stephanie was telling me, isn't it possible that going about our daily activities of non-spiritual things also teaches discipline and faith lessons? Teaching our children in the mundane things of life to lift our thoughts to heaven and God and tie everything into how this skill or learning could be used to honor him. So, there have been generations, like I said, who didn't plan. Stephanie says, I know in the 70s, my parents had a young man live with them. Here's an interesting case study. For a while, who literally spent all his time reading his Bible and praying, and he was zero earthly good. I used to have a friend who said, they're so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good. So this young guy was sure that the world was ending and he needed to be ready, but he couldn't help with shopping or meals or contribute to finances or do any repair work on the vehicles because he was absolutely useless. and he depended on everyone else to do things for him. 40 years later, he's still having to live in this world, and it's important to train our kids in the mundane know-how of life while we teach and live in such a way that it integrates and prepares them for anything God calls them to do. My thoughts with that is just thinking back to 20 years ago. I have had, and man, that sun is getting so bright. I'm going to see what I can do here to kind of fix that. So I have had, I've observed a lot of young people, and I honestly was kind of the same mindset, but I had different parents who told me, no, you're going to college and you're going to get a better education than even they had been able to have. But 20 years ago, a whole lot of young people in my generation were drawn into the mindset that they didn't need any higher education because Jesus was coming again soon. And so all they needed to do was go out and give Bible studies and talk to people about Jesus. And that was it. That was all they should be doing with their time. And honestly, I think it's kind of horrific, but a lot of older leaders who all had, get this, salaries, degrees, 401ks, mortgages on their homes, they all intensely told these young people in my generation 20 years ago that they didn't need any higher education because guess what? Jesus was coming so soon. All you need is some religious training so you can do the most important work. So these young people spent their 20s avoiding higher education and doing the early 20-something thing of living dependent on the generosity and the hospitality of others who were able to extend those resources precisely because they had invested in higher education and developed contributory careers that allowed them to have solid, stable incomes and financial success so that they could provide for other young people who weren't getting that information and success and careers for themselves. But here's the kicker. Eventually, every single one of those young people went down one of two paths. Either they got bitter and disillusioned and they left their faith, and they were angry against God, and they decided to go and follow a completely different path. Or they realized that without more education and more practical trade skills, because, hey, college is not for everyone, but without viable skills, they could not support a family. So as they moved toward the ends of their 20s and into their 30s, they realized their abilities to support and provide, male or female, were severely limiting their opportunities to marry, have children, develop a family, and actually move onward at an age-appropriate pace with the rest of life. They also began to realize that it wasn't going to be socially acceptable for them to live off of other people's financial generosity and hospitality, like renting a room in somebody's basement and living on a stipend as an evangelistic Bible worker or whatever for the rest of their lives. They weren't going to be able to sustain that, living off of other people's generosity on those tiny, tiny wages without any health care and still get married, have pregnancies, get prenatal care, take care of small children, and so on and so forth. So, what happened? Well, those who didn't leave, most of them have ended up going back to school, guess what? While married or with small children in their 30s and even their 40s, because they realized that all the stuff that they skipped when they were young, single, footloose, fancy-free, totally flexible and independent, now they have to go do all of those things in order to be able to actually provide responsibly for spouses and families. Now, another one of my friends says the same thing happened in her country. She's not from the United States. And she says the consequences were so devastating that most had to put aside any form of gospel work in order to be able to feed their families doing odd jobs. Even worse, same kind of experience. Most lost faith, became bitter, and left the church and their religion feeling completely defeated. My friend Stephanie told me, I have felt so sorry for so many of my contemporaries who sunk themselves into the end is here kind of scenario, especially after big, huge events like 9/11. And everything they were told like misplaced prophecy kind of things, where they were like, oh, everything's going to happen, the end of the world is coming, and then they put aside their career training in order to live with church members, rent a room somewhere, live in somebody's generosity, and do what they considered to be gospel work. And then they realized that the years kept going on, and there was a life to live, a family to support, and they had to start from scratch, figuring out how to survive in the real world in their mature adult years. This is not doing our kids any favors. It's not doing the next generation any favors. Another friend of mine says, case in point, herself. Instead of getting a high school diploma, she was told she should just get a GED, and that meant she missed out on any scholarships to go to college. Then she went to missionary school that she funded by working for $5.65 an hour, where she was taught, instead of practical skills, she was taught how to argue about doctrinal differences. She lived off minimum wage for the next few years, barely surviving on $700 a month until she got married at the ripe old age of 20. Her husband was extremely abusive, and she had been told that getting ready for Jesus coming and like living way out in the country was the most important thing ever. And so she just shut up and submitted because she was told that was her place. Her husband moved them out to a shed in the woods where they lived like ancient Waldensians without electricity, water, phone, or even a toilet. She and her children were treated like animals. Now get this, I realize this is a super extreme case, so this is not something I'm saying this is going to happen to everybody. I'm just saying this is where it can lead. So one of the reasons that she didn't leave, because she had no resources. No way to support herself, no way to help her children by renting a house, no way to buy food, no way to get a car, no way to hold down a job with a bunch of children, and not having the education to help her take those steps. And the other reason was because of fear. She didn't want anyone else educating her children because they didn't have the Jesus-oriented mindset that she had, and she had been trained to be fearful that her children would be corrupted if she wasn't in charge of every aspect of their instruction. Now, I'm a homeschool mom. I'm not apologetic about that. I love the idea of parents being incredibly engaged in their children's education and in how we teach and train our young people. I think in today's world, our children need intense amounts of parental engagement. I think that was the original plan that God had in mind, was for parents to be heavily and intensely involved. But that is not what I'm talking about here. Now, my friend says, she's been fighting to divorce her abusive husband for 4 years while working hard to put herself through school to get a better job, besides cleaning 60 toilets a week in order to put food in the mouths of her 4 children. Does it sound extreme, she says? Yes. Yes, it is. If she had been encouraged to go to school and get a decent job, 13 years of submitting to domestic violence would not have continued, because she would have had other options other than homelessness and now a job emptying trash cans and scrubbing poop. Now, is she ashamed of doing those jobs? No. She's just saying that she could have been better equipped to take care of her children and not live trapped in domestic violence under the guise of spiritual control if she had been given better options. I hear these kinds of stories from young women and mature women all the time. The fact that they were not allowed or encouraged to get enough education to have viable ways to support themselves means that they were left trapped and helpless when the people, the men, the husbands who had vowed to protect and provide for them did not follow through in godly ways on those vows. Here's what I believe. I believe that God needs dedicated missionary workers in every line of employment. Doctors, dentists, lawyers, plumbers, electricians, teachers, repairmen, telemarketers, entrepreneurs. I don't care what job God has given you to do it with all your might for His glory. Do it in a way that when other people are whining and complaining and frustrated about stuff that they don't like, that you're the one who's still cheerful and positive, and that you're the one that people come to asking, how is it that you are so different? And then you can say, well, let me tell you. Now, another friend of mine is saying she always encourages women with the idea of Proverbs 31. Well, you know what? The Proverbs 31 woman was not just domestic, she was also competent in business. She was clearly highly educated. She was a competent manager of other people and teams. She had so much to offer, and she was heavily engaged in her whole community. So I believe that the solution needs to be both and. We both teach our children how to think critically and how to recognize truth and measure that against what Jesus Christ has taught us and what the Bible has to say. And we encourage them to get education, higher education, along the lines of what they are good at, gifted in, interested in, skilled at, and how their minds work. Does that mean college for everyone? Of course not. You know what? There are a lot of needs in trade schools and practical things. Not all of our kids are wired to have the same kinds of giftings. We need to be engaged enough with them to be able to see and explore and encourage the special, unique things God has given them. We need to teach our kids to both understand what they believe and recognize and refute false beliefs. We need to teach our kids to do this both with empathy and compassion as well as effectiveness, not just debate skills without any people skills. I have really strong opinions, in case nobody picked up on that, on not living in fear-based theology and not teaching our children to be afraid of the world that we live in. Now, do we teach them to respect fear and danger? Absolutely. Do we teach them not to just blindly trust people? Oh yeah, even spiritual people, even religious people, even people who have a lot to say about the Bible. But quite often, the way that we have traditionally gone about teaching our kids is done with a coercive stance that's rooted in fear, conspiracy, and shame. And none of this is aligned with the character of God and his approach to loving us. So I believe that our parental duty before God is to prepare our kids for meaningful contribution in the world around us with healing and compassion of Jesus Christ to anyone that they meet, regardless of whether they live to old age, regardless of whether they die young, regardless of whether they are called to be a full-time missionary or a full-time career person or a full-time stay-at-home parent, regardless of any of that. We equip them for success on all fronts. So, to answer the original question, is preventing your children from higher education a form of spiritual abuse? My answer in summary would be, if you are encouraging or actively preventing your kids from pursuing education that will make them productive, healthy, happy citizens who can support and provide for themselves instead of living off of the generosity of other people who got in higher education, and if you are twisting scripture to get them to do this, then yes, I believe that that falls under the umbrella of what would be considered spiritual abuse. And that's not the only form of abuse that would be involved with that, because you're also causing them future financial harm. You're also causing them future financial and not financial, social difficulty, and so many other types of things, as well as making them susceptible to allowing other people to take power and control over them instead of them living according to their own conscience and empowered to follow what God is telling them in their own mind. But I don't believe any of us have to be captive to that. We can empower our young people, our children, our college students to do what is best for them according to the gifts and skills God has given them. So, those are my thoughts. Long-winded perhaps, but it's a heavy topic. I might chop this video into a few separate ones. You can look for it later on YouTube, probably put it on Instagram TV station, my Instagram TV feed. But I want to know your thoughts. And if you were blessed by this, or if you were blessed by some piece of it, would you share it? would you tag me in it if you share it, so that if there's a great conversation that ensues that's educational and informative, that I can participate and learn from that and join in. I would love to hear what you think. Drop me a comment, send me a message, and have a really great week.